These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal, Television for Agricultural Business Decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. As always, it's been a busy week for our team, putting together the best show possible for you. Coming up on this week's show, Dylan Mangiel from Nebraska Extension. He'll stop by to detail the soybean growing season that it was. We'll also get a deep dive into the grain and livestock markets with Darin Newsom. Those stories are coming up on this week's show, but let's begin right here. The Trump administration's plan to lower grocery store prices could include importing more beef. That move has drawn some pushback from cattle producers. As Steve White reports, some ranchers warn cheap imports could undercut efforts to rebuild the domestic cattle herd.
President Trump has said he's going to work his magic to lower beef prices for consumers. However, many cattle producers say any efforts to import beef are at odds with the administration's America First agenda.
The Trump administration faces pushback in cattle country. Talk of lowering beef prices through imports has frustrated ranchers. Speaking at the National FFA convention, Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins defends her boss.
And so what the president was talking about was nothing much different from what we have done for a really long time.
Rollins says imports are already part of the U.S. beef supply, mostly lean trim used in ground beef.
Sort of the lower cost beef for those who can't afford a $30 or a $50 or a $70 steak.
Right now, the U.S. brings in about 20,000 metric tons of beef from Argentina. The president's plan would increase that, but Rollins said it's still a small slice of the total.
When you put that up against the fact that we have closed the ports, we have no crossing of live cattle in the last almost 6 or so months, the tariffs, the 50% tariffs on Brazil, we've seen a huge slowing down of product from Brazil. So what the president was talking about in terms of Argentina doesn't even make up for what we haven't gotten across in the last few months.
For cattlemen like Mike Briggs, who have seen the herd size diminish while finally enjoying a shot at profitability, hearing the president tell ranchers they don't understand is personal.
Well, President Trump is my guy. I voted for him 3 times. He has crashed the cattle market.
Briggs takes issue with the president's comments, but he does understand the need to import ground beef, which he says needs to be done carefully.
I don't have any problem with him importing beef. We've been importing all kinds of beef from Australia. My only concern with South America, I hope they keep all the standards high.
14 House Republicans, including Nebraska Congressman Adrian Smith, signed a letter to Rollins.
Avoid, kind of the idea that we're just going to, whether it's accurate or not, bring in all sorts of beef from elsewhere.
Rollins says the administration is also taking steps to help cattle producers, from reopening grazing lands to expanding new processing capacity.
A 5-point plan on how to rebuild the herds.
Rollins also previewed a national campaign to promote homegrown beef, but stopped short of endorsing mandatory country of origin labeling.
Buy American beef, product of the USA.
Ranchers will be watching to see if those plans to rebuild the herd pay off. In the meantime, many remain skeptical about the plan to import foreign beef. Reporting, I'm Steve White.
Thanks for that report, Steve. We'll keep our ear to the ground for more updates as they come. Of course, the Ag Secretary's comments in Steve's story came from the National FFA Convention. And there at the convention, Nebraska students' hard work and entrepreneurial spirit earned national recognition. Cora Hoffschneider of the Centennial FFA chapter here in Nebraska was named the national winner in agricultural sales entrepreneurship. We had the chance to catch up with Cora shortly after that big announcement to hear more about her award-winning SAE project. You were joined by Cora Hoffschneider. She just came off the main stage here at the convention, announced as the #1 proficiency project in the nation when it comes to agricultural sales. We're going to learn about your project. It has to do with Christmas trees, right?
Yes, Christmas trees. A Tree and a Truck is my business. We sell live Christmas trees, wreaths, and then a bunch of other holiday decor.
When did this project start for you?
So this started my freshman year of high school, which would have been the fall of 2020. This year's our 6-year business, and it's just still going strong.
So you continue to do this even though you've graduated from high school. Now I believe you studied at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, right?
Yes. So I'm a sophomore at the University of Nebraska studying ag business. I'm kind of in the process of handing it over to my younger brother. It's all been like a family project this whole time, which makes it super fun. But yeah, still going strong, 6-year in business.
So Christmas trees in Nebraska, that's not something many people think of. Understand you get your trees from another state and you bring them in, right?
Yes, correct. So I wholesale ordered the trees from a tree farm in Minnesota. They're shipped to me wholesale, and then we just sell them out of our machine shed.
So you probably move some of the tractors out of the way, move some trees in. I love it.
Yes.
Talk about the learning curve of what it took for you to learn how, in this area, entrepreneurship of ag sales, some of the things you had to learn early on to make this project successful.
So I had to learn a lot early on. It was super helpful. My mom's actually a banker, so she knew a lot of the finance side of things. And then my dad's a farmer, so that just helps a lot with a lot of different knowledge. Had to learn all about taxes, managing my finances, and then a lot of record keeping stuff, which my parents were both very helpful at teaching me to do.
Was this a dream for you when you started to be on the national stage for your proficiency project?
Yeah, so it was a dream that I thought was like completely out of reach. My biggest goal was making it to state, and then I made it to state my first year, and I was like, okay, this is crazy, what the heck? And now I'm here. It just feels so surreal.
How did it feel hearing your name called?
I honestly was shocked because I was like, there's no way, there's absolutely no way this is me. But it was, and it's true, it's real.
Well, you talked about the transition now to perhaps a sibling moving forward. In your eyes, what's success continue to look like for you and your personal endeavors?
I just hope to keep working with the Christmas tree, maybe have another startup in the floral avenue of things. I'm actually in the angler program at UNL, which has been super helpful in all things entrepreneurship. So we'll see what gets started there.
Our congratulations to Cora Hoffschneider, here recognized at the National FFA Convention for her proficiency project. She calls it a tree and a truck. Some other highlights from the 98th National FFA Convention for the Cornhusker State. Nebraska's Claire Whipple. She hails from the Chambers FFA chapter originally. She was named National FFA Central Region Vice President. That was the first national officer from Nebraska since year 2012. Our congratulations to her. Getting back to business in Nebraska, harvest is getting wrapped up around the state. We had the chance this week to catch up with a Filmore County producer, Lance Fala, who recently turned from harvest to field work. Here's our discussion. Let's back up before we talk about the harvest and see where you're at. How has the growing season been here in 2025 for you guys?
It's been kind of a roller coaster. When we started planting, it was dry, but planting conditions were, as far as I was concerned, near perfect. It planted beautiful. The ground was mellow. And then when we were kind of starting to panic a little bit because we were starting to, dry out after we planted, we caught a little rain. So planting season went well as far as I was concerned.
Are you guys primarily dry land or have some irrigated acres as well?
Mostly irrigated.
Mostly irrigated, okay. So able to kind of bring the crop along. Would you say this year, did you have to run your pivots as often as you typically would?
Oh, I would say, of course, I don't know what average or normal is anymore, but this year, we started out, like I said, we had a little rain early, and then June, July was hot and dry. I was actually kind of getting concerned. It was getting to be a bear. And then, late August, it turned around and started raining, and our little bit of dry land that we have actually did very, very well.
To the harvest season, you kind of alluded to it, but as you look back on both your corn and soybeans, how did things finish yield-wise? In line with what you expected and compared to previous years?
Soybeans were all over the place. I had some irrigated soybeans that they were okay, but nothing real good. But I had dryland soybeans that were way better than some of the irrigated. A lot of that was location, I think. Corn as well, it was all over. If you didn't get touched by wind and storms, the corn was okay. But, a lot of corn, whether it was a disease or a wind issue, I felt it was not as good as it could have been. In July and August, even though it was hot, we were watering it. I really felt like we were going to have some really nice crops until that August 11th storm. That's when things just took a turn.
And now here we are in November. You tell me, you're calling yourself officially done with the harvest. It was kind of a long harvest, though, as compared to years past, right?
It was. Last year we started around the 10th of September and we were done the 10th of October. We never had to quit. Although exhausting, it was kind of nice to just do it and be done. This year it was start and stop. The crops were wet when we started, so we had to sit around and wait for them to dry down. And then I think I counted up, say maybe at least 12 days that we had to sit because of either rain or mist or drizzle. And then toward the end, like a week ago or 10 days ago, it was rainy and misty. And at that point, we just kept going, and we kind of made a mess out of things, but it was just time to be done. Things were starting to get, the crop, the plant itself was deteriorating, trying to fall over. We were one wind away from a field that wasn't that great to getting to being even worse.
Certainly takes a toll on folks as we get here into November. All right, what comes next here as we, again, in November? Do you guys do any fall tillage or fall applications before we head into the winter months?
We do. Right now, we're just kind of fresh getting stuff done. We just unhooked the grain cart this morning, but, we're closing pivot tracks. We have some nice moisture in the soil, so of course the grain cart's packed it down, so we'll do some disc ripping and stuff where some high traffic areas were, and then I'm hoping next week we'll get to start putting anhydrous on. We try and get as much done in the fall as we can, so that's kind of what our primary goal is here, is to get to put anhydrous on next week is what our hopes are.
Thanks to Lance for having our Market Journal crew out to his operation, see how things are wrapping up here for the 2025 fall harvest. Up next, it's our chance to do a deep dive in both the grain and livestock markets. And joining the program this week is Barchart Senior Analyst Darin Newsom. Darin, it's great to have you back here on Market Journal. Thanks for making time.
I appreciate you having me back on, Bryce.
Well, it's been kind of a wild ride for both the grain and livestock markets. Let's start on soybeans. Quite the rally we've seen here. A lot of that has to do, at least the analysts tell us, that's because of the announced China trade deal. Have you had a chance to dig into that? And if so, what kind of concrete figures have you seen there?
Yeah, it kind of ties into the livestock because it's similar to digging into a feed yard pen. There's nothing to it. China won the quote unquote meeting or whatever we want to call it. There is no deal. The U.S. backed down on its tariffs. China has agreed to do what it was doing before. Nothing more, just what it was doing before. 25 million metric tons per year. That's what it was before, actually smaller than some of the years before. So yeah, it's nothing. It doesn't amount to anything. U.S. is still a secondary player on the global in the global soybean market. That's the way it is. China's still buying. 3 cargoes of U.S. soybeans were announced to sale. They just bought 10 from Argentina. So what they're doing is business. This is the time of year they cover some of their secondary supplies from the United States until the next round of South American supplies are available. The rally that we're seeing in futures, a lot of it's coming from the algorithms. They're buying some based on strange headlines. But we saw the same thing last year. How'd that turn out for everybody? So I'm not reading much into it.
All right, let's switch from the soybean trade over to corn. Kind of stuck in this sideways pattern again for corn here over the last bit. What could break the corn market either way?
Probably not going to be much of anything. I think really what ultimately works into the corn market is the bin doors get shut tight for winter, and then as long as demand stays solid, then we're going to see merchandisers pushing to get some of those supplies moved back into the pipeline before next spring. So, as we look at the future spreads and we see what's been going on with the May, July, we can tell that's the time frame as we get into planting season. The merchandisers are a bit concerned about getting their needs covered. So, I think, again, similar to what I just said about soybeans, I don't believe in analogous years, but I think the structure of the corn market is similar enough to last year that we could see a winter rally. And remember, last year we did see the futures market saw cash move up through mid to late February and then start backing off again. It would not be surprising to see something similar this time around.
Want to go back in time a little bit, Darin. I vividly remember this moment. Last December, we were talking about the outlook for 2025. We asked what's the best case scenario for the U.S. grain sector. You said a crisis. Anywhere and everywhere, we need there to be, not necessarily a crisis. I shouldn't say that. That's not exactly what you said, but that we need a lack of production from another country. Imagine you stand by those words as we start to eye 2026.
Absolutely. So again, because in so many of these markets, the U.S. has been dealt out of the game, and so we do need to see some sort of problem. Now, that being said, and with what I previously mentioned in soybeans, there is something interesting to watch. We've seen coffee take off, and Brazil is one of the two largest producers of coffee and exporters of coffee in the world. And so if there is a production problem for coffee, and I know it's grown in different parts of a very large country, but if there is weather issues for that country's coffee crop, maybe, just maybe, the U.S. soybean industry can hang its hat on the possibility of some weather problems in soybeans. And that is still something that we're looking at as we make our way through fall and into winter, getting closer to, Brazilian crops already taking center stage, but, their harvest comes around late winter, early spring.
Watch the coffee market, see what could happen in soybeans. I like that advice. We can remember that here for months to come. Darin, last week on the program, we did a deep dive with our analyst talking about the cattle markets, and he said something to the effect of the fundamentals had not changed. And that reminds me of a conversation you and I have had repeatedly talking about the grain market. So on the cattle front, his take was the fundamentals had not changed, but we do see a lot of volatility here on Wednesday as you and I are connecting. Feeder cattle limit down again. What do you make of that sector?
Yeah, the previous analyst is right. I mean, we look at future spreads, we look at basis, and both of them are still bullish. Both of them still indicating, supplies have lost ground to demand. And so, yes, the underlying fundamentals haven't changed, but it's an interesting point about volatility because feeder cattle are a lighter traded futures market. And when you see that, in other words, there's not as many contracts changing hands. So you get a big order coming in and you can get some wide swings. So volatility tends to run higher. And right now, but feeder cattle are about as volatile as any market outside of natural gas, which really doesn't count, as volatile as any market that we watch day to day.
Well, Darin, here we are in the month of November. As we look ahead, some producers across Nebraska wrapping up their harvest, if they haven't already, and some got a few more fields to go through. What kind of advice do you want to leave our viewers with this week, particularly on the grain front?
Yeah, on the grain front, I like this rally in soybeans as a sell. Again, I don't think the U.S. has become a big player in the global game all of a sudden. So I like to use this rally that we're seeing here in late November as a selling opportunity for some of those bushels that have been coming in. If they want to hold something, I mean, you'd certainly hold soybeans, see what happens as we get closer to Brazil's harvest. But I think the corn market actually looks a bit more attractive longer term from a fundamental point of view because a lot of the demand is going to stay with the United States, regardless of what's said and what's done. It looks like demand's still going to stay strong. So, I think they can hold on to some of this newly harvested corn and see what happens over the next few months.
My thanks to Darin for his time and expertise here on this week's program. I want to let you know that coming up next week, we'll be joined by Luke Beckman. He's with Central Valley Ag. As always, we invite your questions on the program. So if you have one you want me to ask Luke, go ahead and email us so I can pass your question along. Well, it's no secret it's been a standout season for feeder cattle sales in Nebraska, where sale barns like Valentine Livestock Auction have seen prices soar to new national highs. While the quality of those sandhills feeder cattle impact those record prices, it also is important to look at the whole picture of the fundamentals driving the beef market right now. You can learn those details on the record-setting feeder cattle prices in the November issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Up next, it's time to check in on weather with Nebraska Extension's Eric Hunt. Eric, we're officially into the month of November, and so far the temperatures have been holding up pretty nice for most of us in Nebraska, but I hear that might be changing in the near term. How do things look?
Well, thanks, Bryce. Definitely a little taste of winter coming up here for the next couple of days. After that, though, we're back to mild temperatures. Start off with, though, Regenerative Agricultural Learning Hub has been developed by the University of Nebraska Extension. Will be available in mid-January. For registration, go to go.unl.edu/regenaghub. Sensible weather, start the week. We're looking at a deep trough over here in the Great Lakes with ridging to the west. That means we're going to have strong northerly flow coming into this region of the country. So keep our temperatures seasonally cold here across pretty much the entire state on Sunday and across eastern portions of the state on Monday. So again, this is a little bit colder than I think we were anticipating at this time last week. Not historically cold for this time of year, but certainly highs probably in the 30s for a good portion of the state on Sunday. A little bit warmer across portions of the Panhandle where you should get into the 40s. And it'll be cold on Monday morning across the eastern half of the state with lows probably getting into the middle upper teens for a lot of us. Certainly some of the coldest temperatures we've seen so far this year. By later Monday, though, the warmer air will be spreading toward the east, so I anticipate highs getting in the 60s across the Panhandle on Monday and getting a little bit cooler as you head further toward the east. But that warm air will rapidly spread toward the east on Tuesday with highs in the 60s statewide. And I'm going to guess that portions of southwestern and west central Nebraska have a pretty good shot at getting at least into lower 70s, maybe even cracking mid-70s as you get closer toward Imperial on Tuesday. We will remain relatively mild for the rest of the week as we see ridging in place across this portion of the continent for at least the next several days going into next week. That's going to keep us dry. It's also to keep our temperatures mostly in the 60s, maybe a little bit cooler a couple times as you get closer towards South Dakota, but generally pretty mild for this time of year. CPC favors warm conditions through the 8 to 14-day outlook. Again, I'm pretty confident this is going to be a good signal. We are likely to remain quite warm through at least about November 19th, maybe even through about closer to Thanksgiving, frankly, if we keep the deeper troughs out here in the west. CPC does show better chances of above average precipitation across the entire north central portion of the country. And again, now that's going to be contingent upon getting a storm system to come out here about the end of this next week, or probably beginning of the week after that, so the end of next weekend, more or less. We may see a storm system come out that would generate precipitation here across the central plains of western Corn Belt. That is not a consistent signal in the models. You'll notice that the European weeklies are a lot more bullish on the precipitation being more prominent here in the west. Not necessarily showing a dry signal for us, like we do see further toward the south and east, but not necessarily showing a wet signal either. So there's a possibility we may not see that better moisture make its way into our area until we get closer about November 20th, 21st. And for some of us in the state, that would be about, we may not actually have a drop of moisture for some of us until about November 20th, 21st. So at that point, we may really actually need that moisture. Speaking of moisture, we have basically had nothing across state here in the last 7 days. And that lack of moisture is starting to cause more problems here across portions of northeastern Nebraska. We did see an expansion of normal dryness here across portions of central and northeastern Nebraska, and some additional expansion of moderate drought here across the northeastern corner of the state. I will point out, with the government shutdown, some of the products that we like to use to assess drought have simply not been available, and that's making that job harder for those that do the drought monitor. Something else that's been a problem, or was a problem earlier this summer, was the lack of sun. So this is at York. So this is basically showing from July 4th to about July 24th. Peak grain filling time period. We had a significant deficit of solar radiation across this region this summer. Soil temperatures right now currently right about 50 degrees, give or take, for most of the state. And our weekly temperature precipitation around it for the week ending November 1st, 2025. Back to you, Bryce.
Thanks for that update, Eric. We appreciate it. Well, finally today, it has been quite the year for soybean producers around the region. Alex Makovica recently caught up with an extension educator and plant pathologist to discuss the season that it's been.
Joining us is Dylan Mangel with Nebraska Extension to talk about the 2025 growing season for soybeans across the state. They faced a number of challenges. Dylan, let's start with, I guess, high level across the state, coast to coast, what you saw in terms of disease and insect pressure.
Yeah, we've had we were expecting a bad disease pressure year with all the moisture we had. More moisture means more disease. And, it's good for beans, but the disease loves moisture too. So we expected a lot. That started off early on with that wet soils after planting. We had a lot of infection that occurs through that root zone when those seeds are small. And that was sudden death syndrome. But we really don't see those symptoms till later in the season. So as the season progressed, as we got into August, that's when that started to show, despite it being a much earlier infection. We also had white mold this year across the state, but it wasn't as bad as 2023. 2023 was sort of a record year in Nebraska, but thankfully our July was a little bit warmer than the conditions that prefers, and we had cooler temperatures in 2023. So it held it off a little bit, but we did see it, just didn't cause the yield loss that we had in 2023.
Well, Dylan, producers thinking about the 2026 growing season, you mentioned kind of 3 big points there. What do they need to think about here in this next growing season? Are there changes they could make to maybe prevent that from happening or reduce it?
Certainly. The most important thing when managing disease is make sure you know what you're managing. So if you've had, look at those field histories. If you had sudden death syndrome in a field 2 years ago, it's still going to be there. If you had white mold in a field 2 years ago, when you had beans in that rotation last, maybe, it's still going to be there. So think about those and manage specifically to those problems. If you didn't have any of those problems, and if you had a healthy field, I wouldn't rush out and make a preventative treatment for white mold, for example. If you had sudden death syndrome specifically, think about seed treatments that are going to specifically target sudden death syndrome. There's a lot of products available, and there's a lot of new products coming on the market. So try to place those, though, where you have the disease, and maybe when prices are the way they are, don't place so much of that investment where you haven't had that disease history.
Sure, absolutely. All right, let's round our conversation out with this. You guys have offered this for a number of years now, free testing for soybean cyst nematode. Tell us more about that and how producers can really take advantage of that.
So we call October Soybean Cyst Nematode Action Month. November works too as we move into this fall season. It's just the time of the year where those nematode levels are at their highest they're going to be in those fields coming out of beans. It's pretty easy to sample for soybean cyst nematode, but sampling is the only way you're really going to know if you have that in there. It's the #1 biologic yield limiting agent of soybean. It impacts a huge number of acres, and it's still spreading, and it's getting worse. So the Nebraska Soybean Board has funded free testing for any Nebraska growers. If you'd like to take advantage of that, you can send samples to the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic, or you can give us a call over here at the clinic, and we'll get you more details on how you can take advantage of that.
Our thanks to Alex and Dylan for their contributions on this week's edition of Market Journal. Let you know that if you're looking for more insights throughout the entire growing season when it comes to growing crops, the website to keep up with everything is cropwatch.unl.edu. Well, that is going to do it for this week's edition of Market Journal. Before we go, let you know that if you want to keep up with the conversation throughout the week, we invite you to follow Market Journal on social media. We hope to see you right back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.